course. I am really deeply impressed by the overwhelming interest in this topic, as I think I'm not exactly informed, but more than 200 people had registered to participate into this event. So I have the honor to guide you through this webinar by explaining you first the major aims of the Digital Treasure project as a kind of contextualization of the online course. And on the other side, give a very, very basic overview over the modules of the literacy online course. And of course, to introduce the most important parts of today's afternoon, evening, our speakers who will hold the lectures. I also want to inform you about the procedure, how we planned this event during this webinar. After the lectures, we have time for questions to the speakers. So you can just write your remarks or questions in the chat already during the lectures or after the lectures, and the speakers gladly will answer to your comments. So allow me to start first with a very basic introduction about the European Digital Treasure project, which is co-funded by the European Union within the frame of the Creative Europe program, lasting for altogether 4 years till September 2022. Under the lead of the Spanish State Archive, altogether 7 partners, 7 institutions, namely the National Archives of Portugal, Norway, Malta, Hungary, the Munster Technology University from Ireland, and the International Center for Archival Research, shortly ICARUS, cooperate within this project. So in a nutshell, you can say that the basic aim of one of the basic aims of the project is to increase the public visibility of archives as the keepers of a common European historical heritage. In order to achieve this project, the project partners focus on mainly 3 pillars, namely to develop new business models for the archives, then to tell the stories of history by creating free transmedia exhibitions, and the third big pillar is to work with new target audiences. And especially this third pillar is very important for today's topic, the online literacy course, as within the project we defined, among others, also the group of the young generation as new target groups. In other words, the pupils attending secondary classes, secondary schools. So the Archival Literacy Online Course is a tool basically to reach both the pupils and the teachers by offering material that may be useful during the school lessons. This course is structured basically in 3 modules. I just try to share the screen now, just to give you a short overview. So I hope you can see the screen now. So that's the surface of the online course. As you can see, you can log in by creating an account with an email address and a password. First, you have the 3 modules. Altogether, it consists of 3 modules. As introduction, there is always a short video of an archivist. And then you have the main topics, the main points that you should learn by going through the different sections. Below here you have the sections. So the first module is giving a funded knowledge about the base of what an archive is and how to use an archive. As you can see, the sections, it's not possible to enter a second section, the third section, without finishing the first one. So cheating is not possible in this online course. Second module is about more personal data. It is a kind of practical guidance for working in archives, give an overview over the different types of sources, and give some important search strategies, practical hints how to work in archives. And the third section is the online repository of primary sources regarding three main topics: pandemics and epidemics, economic crisis, and migration. I think a very representative selection of primary sources mirroring these three very current topics, as you all know. But how to deal with this, I think that our speakers will get in more detailed information. So that should be enough for general introduction, and I want to give the floor to our first main speakers. There are two. So I want to introduce Mrs. Teresa Gomes. She's history teacher at the Escola Básica y Secundaria de Vila Nova de Cerveira, and Mrs. Emilia Leito, also history teacher at the Escola Secundaria de Mãe Martins, both from Portugal. And they will speak from the teacher's perspective about memory and education and the role of archives in the construction of the European identity. Colleagues, the floor is yours.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. Hi, everyone. We will present you 4 projects using archive materials. And before that, I will show you some topics about history teaching and how we use the primary sources in our classrooms, especially in the secondary grade. That's the grade that me and Emilia teach in our schools. Carl, sorry, you told the schools not right. I'm from Secundária de Mãe Martins.
Oh,
and Emilia,
mixed it up. Excuse me.
Yeah,
but
it's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No problem. No problem. Okay, so our theme lecture is Memory and Education, the role of archives in the construction of European identity. And for building an European identity, we must go through documents as national and European collective memory. So we must promote educational importance of national and local archives. And we have 3 examples. I will share my presentation with you. Okay. Those 3 archives that are the examples of some more that we have in our country is the National Archive Torre do Tombo and the municipal archives from Sintra and Vila Nova de Cerveira. So with these archives, we must emphasize the contribution of education for constructing a memory in the new generation. So how can we do that? By, of course, emphasizing the curricular importance of history. that consists in building knowledge to build memory. And for that, we go through the appreciation of the nature and potential of the document as source of knowledge. So our students usually consult documents as primary or second sources to study all of the subjects that are in the curriculum in history subject. Also through the development of interdisciplinary practice with other disciplines, with other areas of knowledge in the analysis of the document information, and also through the relationship between archives and school for the knowledge of the past. In our curriculum, we also have a curricular articulation domains. It's a new area in our presentation, and it's giving up the baby steps because it's not easy to work with other teachers from other subjects. But in this case, we have some examples of official documents that promote this practice. One example is the profile of student on completing obligatory schooling. And we take some of the goals that are defined in that document, like, for instance, be proficient in diversified instruments to search, describe, evaluate, validate, and mobilize information. And this is for young and for older students, all the same, in a critical and autonomous way, checking different documentary sources and their credibility, and also transform that information in knowledge, because the value of the role of the various forms of artist expression is also important, and of the tangible and intangible heritage in the life and culture of the communities. And so the importance of the municipal archives in their collaborations with schools. Other document is specifically for History A. It's a subject in the secondary level, not for all the students in the secondary, only for the students who chose humanities, but also for some pupils that have economic and social grade. Three examples of key learning in this subject: valuing historic knowledge as the result of rigorous construction resulting from the confrontation of sources and hypotheses, using primary or secondary sources, approach to significant aspects of the evaluation of humanity, integrating lines of problematization reflection on the relations between the past and the present, and also involvement of students in the construction of knowledge, allowing the deepening of certain themes, the mobilization of local components for the construction of the curriculum and interdisciplinary explorations. Emilia will show you now 4 examples of how can we put this in our classrooms and the result of that work. Emilia?
Emilia, could you please turn on the audio?
I'm very able with this.
Emilia, do you want to
yes,
stay with
of
my?
Course,
okay.
Please. Yes, of
okay.
course, please. It was I said, but in mute.
Okay.
Well, first I want to thank you. I want to thank the opportunity to show our projects I put in my secondary school. I intend to report with this presentation show my experience as a history teacher in the involvement of secondary school students in construction of their local, national, and European memory. Throughout my career as a teacher, this is long career, I was faced with the need to bring students closer to the way of making history, to involve them in teaching learning process. A good strategy to arouse students' interest is to show them the importance of history as a people's memory and how the construction of historical knowledge can be an appealing process. It was thus I soon realized that the role of archives and archival documents can be indispensable to arouse the interest of adolescents in history and the consultation of what until recently was considered a place only for access for scholars. On the other hand, we see more and more, particularly among young people, the absence of identity references that are so necessary for national and European conscience. When opting for a type of education that intends to get to know our heritage, we realize that this knowledge becomes a tool of identity reference, but at the same time of valorization and cultural preservation. You can put in, okay, thank you. Bearing this reality in mind, in first decade of the 21st century, I started selecting a documentary collection in a proximity file. You have a view of this municipal archive, Vila Nova de Cerveira, and with a group of secondary school students, more mature and sensible to work with the archival documents. We know that this is a single document whose handling must be cautious. We started the work. The choice fell on 19th century wheels and their material and spiritual impact. Taking into consideration that this documentary source has a very rich content, allowing numerous studies in different aspects of history that include mentalities and behaviors, demography, economics, and culture. Through then, we could make the portrait of a community of the time, but also of the importance that European Christianity continued to have. The handling of the document and the information obtained an opportunity to deepen historical knowledge and perform interpretations, arouse the notable interests in students, revealing an exceptional motivation for the teaching learning process. It must be said that the relationship established between the archive and school has been playing a leading role in promoting this motivation, which is favorable for both institutions. In 2018, we celebrate the centenary of the end of World War I and the terrible pandemic that devastated Europe and in particular Portugal. We associated ourselves to this event, and during extra school hours with a group of students, we conducted a survey in city councils minutes on the impact of the two events at the local level. In addition to the results obtained, which were presented to the public, we believe that it was once again an excellent opportunity to bring students closer to the archival document and to make them feel that their locality participated in a worldwide event. The digital treasures that the project which enthusiastically adhered, despite the pandemic situation we are experiencing, give us the possibility to knowing and transmitting what the archive document is, the possibility of knowing other realities from far from here due to the internet, brings students from other European countries closer together, creates an European conscience, and at the same time allows them to know documents that would otherwise have been forbidden to them. It is in this context that we are doing research on pandemics such as smallpox, bubonic plague, and pneumonia, using documents online from the National Archive and from the local archives. The final result will be the production of a text to be published, and if the pandemics allows it, a public presentation of the work produced. Moreover, because I teach the subject of history of culture and the arts to students of specialized artistic music education, we are developing an original composition of one of poems selected by students in present academic year using the Poesia Trovadoresca of the King Dom Dinis, a medieval Portuguese king, knows by her poetry, present in the National Archives. This will later be put to music and sung by the refereed students and at the same time recorded. It's our experience, or my experience with students from the north of Portugal. If you have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for these insights. To the audience, if you want, if you raise your virtual hand, you can ask questions directly, so you need not to type it in the chat, but you can also say the questions orally. So the floor is yours. So there's one question. Does the students of your course make presentations of their works for other courses or for other students? I don't know, Teresa or Emilia, who want to answer?
I think this is for me, no?
I think so.
Well, better you mute. I think I want to present these conclusions to other students and also to the community, because we have a close relation with the municipal archive, I said, and perhaps if the situation, pandemic situation allows it, I want to present the results publicly. I don't know if this is the better word, but is what I want. If I don't know if it's possible to show our results to the Europe between or the project. I don't know if it is possible. You can say me something for this, because we have a text at final, and if it's possible to show to to Europe is better. And also, I think that the composition of the Poesia Trovadoresca, it will be nice because it's original. I don't know if I answer okay, but.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, Amelia.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask what was the reaction on the part of the students to this project, because it's definitely very interesting, and I think even on a pan-European perspective, it definitely has a lot of potential. One of the things I think that it's also the House of European History is trying to do is to give this pan-European perspective of having different people from around Europe and sharing their stories, their vision, their showing a certain degree of commonality. And I would love to know what the reaction on the part of the students was to such a project, because I think it's unusual, to do this.
Thank you. I think, like I show, it is not unusual for us to do some project like this, and perhaps the students is an exceptional motivation for them, because they now is not, I want to say that now is not the same. Reading the documents on internet is not the same that reading the real document. Is better. And the project I present, that the pandemic on 2018, it was an exceptional presentation. The students are very involved in. I want to say that it was a little group. It wasn't all the students, but it was very interesting. But because they are involved in this process of making history, and it's better. Because sometimes I think that history is not the very defended. People want more the technology than this kind of subjects, and involving the students with this process is very interesting. And the motivation is other than only communicate things that happens in other times. I hope that I answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not very able in English, but
it's okay. Perfect.
Por última duda,
So there was another question, whether this methodology can be used with elderly people also as students, for they are also not very familiar how to use archives.
Yes, we have some experience with grown-up students, elderly students, and they like and appreciate the working with original documents, and they are very curious to understand the writing, for example, but also to know some of the information that the document can bring us from the other times. And yes, that's a methodology that we can use with adult pupils, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So in case at the moment there are no other questions to this, we can proceed to our next speaker. And I want to welcome Ms. Marika Camilleri. She's also history and English teacher at St. Elias College in Malta. I think this time I picked the right school. And she will speak about the archival literacy as inspiring learners through documentary heritage. Marika, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Let me share my screen. Yeah. A moment. Okay. So, my topic is archival literacy, inspiring learners through documentary heritage. So I started off in asking, what is archival literacy? And why is it important? And when I looked it up, I came up with a definition. And what Weiner says is the recognition of the need for information, a way of identifying the sources, finding them, evaluating them, organizing them, and using them efficiently. Now, why is it important? Okay, nowadays, educational systems have changed, both in the physical classroom and in the virtual classroom. While before we were focused mainly on content, okay, if I had to ask people my age what history is, the general public would, oh, it's dates and it's facts and it's events. But nowadays, teachers in classrooms have the responsibility of equipping students with mastering reasoning skills, such as critical thinking. And this is not an easy task. First of all, it gives a certain amount of, by using archival sources, it gives a certain amount of analytical skills and leads us to the core principle of having our students, our future adults, who do not just accept everything at face value, but they can criticize it, okay? And through introducing archival sources in the classroom, this can help to contribute to critical thinking, okay? And this, like everything else, has constraints, okay? At least here in Malta, one of the main constraints is the curriculum. It's never-ending syllabi. For example, year 8 students, 12-year-olds, within 9 months of schooling, have to cover 1,000 years of history, European and Maltese, which is a phenomenal task. We are also, you are given, a certain idea that certain things have to be finished by a certain time. And you have parental pressure where, they want their children to come home with all this knowledge. So another thing is testing. Nowadays, we have learning outcome frameworks, and they also check whether the teacher's methods are effective. Many teachers are actually familiar with archives, but finding the right source to fit into your curriculum isn't always easy. It's time-consuming, together with preparation, research, corrections, etc. Looking for primary sources isn't always easy. One other things which I also come across is often a lot of people do not know the difference between a library and an archive. Or else they have this misconception of an archive being so closed and mysterious, and something beyond anybody's reach, which I think that if we target a younger audience like students in secondary schools, they can actually break this impression, okay? Why? What is the benefit of using primary sources in the classroom? First of all, students start getting analytical skills. They question. They become more engaged. They are motivated. They are more. Their empathy levels increase. They're hooked. This year I was discussing the Inquisition with the students, and I used a case that I had come across as a student of history, where this woman who was illiterate had actually denounced her husband in front of the Inquisitor for reading a prohibited book. And I gave it to the students. We had already discussed the implications of how the Inquisition grew, etc. And they had to come up with ideas of how, why do you think that the woman denounced her husband? They come up with a lot of fantastic ideas, really, kind of like she wanted to get rid of her husband or she wanted to marry somebody else. But when we actually, put all the thoughts together, they actually came up with the idea that the church had such a strong influence on the people that they actually feared that their husband would burn in the fires of hell for all their lives, and therefore they didn't want that. So students were able to think critically and come up with a number of ideas, which at the end of it, they were so hooked on it, they were coming to look for what are we going to do next? What are you going to give us next? So they actually get really interested in what they're doing because they feel that they are a part of it, that they feel what the other people, the people who lived 500 years ago were feeling. Okay, it has its limitations. Like everything else, primary sources, we don't always know the motivation why these were created. Okay, one other example was the siege of 1565. And I gave the students a number of pictures of paintings which are found in the Grand Master's Palace. And they had to decipher what the people in the picture were doing and why they were painted. And who do you think commissioned them? I didn't tell them where they were coming from. And so they had to figure out the motivation, which they found was not always completely clear. Okay. However, this weakness can actually be changed into a strength, and seeing how different perspectives can create different sources. It helps students to think historically. It creates the idea of significance of continuity, of change, empathy, finding evidence in a lot of things. Like for them, it was like creating a jigsaw puzzle and putting in pieces. And depending on which piece of the puzzle they get, they are fitting in a picture. And they loved it. So actually getting the archives into the classroom could make the students become part and parcel of their heritage and appreciate it so much more. Okay, it helps them to analyze what's going on even around them and question not just the past, but even what's going on in the present. Okay. Another thing which I found was very important is giving them a context. Like the case of the inquisitorial document, they had to know the context of medieval Europe and early modern Europe, and why it was important to see something like that. So it actually encouraged this kind of historical thinking. Now, I'd like to focus a bit on the Archives Literacy course, where the main aim was to inspire both students and teachers to look at archival records. And Module 1 focused mainly on defining the importance of archives to society, Why are they important? Why is it important that we have such open access? Why is it, what makes an archive? How does it differ from a library? What are the qualities that make an archive? How to also defining and outlining the development that there has been in archives over the years, and understanding the value of archival literacy informing the collective memory. How an archival document can actually change the history that we have learned, that we know about today. Module 2 manages to link and help the student associate archives to themselves, how they themselves contribute to archives, and where now we are studying other people. In the future, people would be studying us, because we too contribute unwillingly or willingly to archives through identifying the different records which are created in our lives as we go along, being registered at birth, being registered at school, registered for our exams, when we start working, registered for taxes, etc. Okay, there was also the idea of differentiating between legal and formal information and that which is public or private. How freely can it be shared? Okay, and the rights that each and every individual has to access archives. The final module was actually preparing the sources for teachers to use in the classroom. And this was divided into 3 different sections: pandemics and epidemics, economic crises, and migration. The site was populated by a number of primary sources, and also lesson plans were created. The pedagogy used in creating the lessons was I know, I wonder, I learned, which basically starts off with what the student knows, the context, the idea of wandering through the archival source, and then putting both the archival source and the context together to figure out what I learned, to get inferences, to come up with conclusions. So, to conclude all this, historic inquiry could be engaging even to students who are given history not as an option, but they're actually have to do it as part of their studies. How it establishes and raises the idea that citizens in a democracy have the right to archives. It helps them to ask meaningful questions and to address these questions and substantiate their answers through drawing of conclusions, through educated conclusions. Okay, reflecting through possible solutions to the problems that they have actually come across. Thinking historically isn't just a chronology. It is not just events. It is not just putting in a date. It is not just one event that has actually created a fulcrum for humanity, but it is each and every individual's contribution to making a heritage. Also, it helped them to have informed judgments. And the students can actually predict and think what might have happened. They can answer the questions which the teacher has given them through the knowledge that they have acquired through the archives. They can also compare, contrast different perspectives, okay? In the same way that I had given them the pictures from the Siege of Malta, I also gave them information of Suleiman the Magnificent not wanting the Piali Pasha and Mustafa Pasha to actually enter the harbor, and because it was shameful. So they could actually contrast a different perspective and come up with conclusions. So archives make it possible for students to experience history, not just in a book, but they actually figure out that they are part of it and it's their heritage and it's something to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marika, for this very comprehensive insight of a, well, perhaps eventually brave new world in classrooms, or visions in classrooms that
It
might
worked.
happen.
It really worked. And I was so surprised.
That's perfect, yeah. From just one remark from my side, I think it's very important to make understand the pupils the difference between primary and secondary sources, because in or even adults do not really separate these two things. To understand that the history book is not a primary source, not at all. It's an interpretation based, in the best case, upon primary sources, but not always. So, so it's definitely true that the primary sources is not telling always the absolute truth. That's not the job of a primary source. But in any case, it's authentic. And that's the most important thing. It's authentic from the time, even if it's a intentional source.
Yes.
It intends to build a tradition for the future, but it's authentic.
But even that intent could actually say something about the perception. And that is why such a weakness could actually be changed into a strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you very much. Floor is yours, dear audience. Any input from your side?
There were a question from Trinidad. How do you think, in what way could the presentation of primary sources by the archives have the interaction of young people with them?
Could you repeat, please?
Okay.
How do you think, in what way could the presentation of primary sources by the archives help interaction of young people with them? Well, with Trinidad, I actually worked on the third module. And when you actually present a primary source, it's amazing how they actually sit down and they kind of ask questions. For example, I showed them a photo of one of the passport photos at the National Archives, and they started commenting about the way the clothes the person was wearing. And they said, for example, and I said, oh, he must have been not so rich because he doesn't have any jewelry. So they themselves children tend to be very, very observant, and they can really surprise you with what they actually are ready to question. And they actually really empathize. It must have been difficult for somebody to leave, for example, when you discuss migration, to leave their country and start off somewhere else and leave their family behind. Or else, for example, we discussed Roger de Norman actually carrying whole populations off because they opposed him. So, they were actually shocked in actually trying to break, seeing how these people actually had their roots torn off and had to plant them somewhere else. So it was the way they interact, they become so much interested in what they're doing that they keep asking. And to be honest, you have to steal somebody else's lesson to be able to finish your syllabus.
Thank you. I think there's another question, Michael.
Hello. My question is, besides giving the primary sources to children, which is very interesting, and you make them aware even to the others that are outside the archive that how important these are for humanity. Are we also trying to give the skills to the students where to search, how to search, because it's quite a skill that they will even use after, even not if searching for past historical items, for example, which is quite important to have. And I meet students that literally they enter university and don't know where the archives are, for example. And it's quite unfortunate. I'm not talking about Malta. I think it's somewhere that is prevalent
Actually,
everywhere.
what had initially shocked me was, for example, when there was dam
And
rap-
it's my experience as a parish archivist working voluntarily when students come from different departments.
as you know,
I have to help them going around.
but the thing is, I also noticed that different archives at times have different cataloging systems.
Yes.
So it is not always, not everybody is accustomed to the different system. For example, I remember myself first getting used to the Archive of the Order of Malta, where they have the repertorio, despite how old it is, it's helpful. And then going to the National Archives and finding a different system of record management. So initially, it's difficult. Ideally, in an ideal situation, access to archives would be homogeneous in a way, where you're going to find the same system everywhere, but archives in nature vary. So having the same homogeneous system is not as easy as one can imagine. And another thing is archives generally have backlogs. There are a lot of issues. Yes, it is important to tell students where to find their sources. It is important to tell students the archives that we have. Obviously, at a young age, you're not going to, at least my students, 11, 12-year-olds, I'm not going to tell them, right, let's go to the archives. First of all, they would be lost. And some of them would actually, say, yes, a day without school. So you have to give them bite-size pieces. And yes, I think that at a certain age, for example, post-secondary students should be encountered, have some sort of encounter with the archives and find a way of going around an archive and finding a way of accessing archives.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there some more remarks?
If I can comment, a couple of years, well, pre-COVID, if anyone remembers what it was like, I was at Chatsworth in the UK, and I spoke to the people who organized educational activities for children. And they said that one of the things that they realized, because obviously of the competition that they had, was that they started to analyze the syllabi, and they started to identify those sections where, as part of their collection, they could intervene and they could offer something which is different. And I think that this is something which can be developed, because obviously the syllabi are set. If the teacher finds even some material, but obviously it's also interesting, like Marika did, which is to create, their own material. It's also interesting that, for example, when children go to a museum or are taken on an outing, very often I remember my time as a kid in Malta, where we would go to the same set stock museums every single year. It would also be interesting on the part of museums to show the backstage, what happens behind, how are how are materials preserved, what happens, how is an object placed on display. And it's interesting for the students to see what happens behind the scenes. Touching the actual documents is very important. It brings everything to life. After all, archives, an essential property of them they are stories. And stories are the things that we grow up with and we learn from. So it's extremely important to make them available. And like Marika did, you bring a story of 400 years ago to life, and it's real. It happened, and you can still discuss it in the frame of a context. And that is something that we lack. We always judge history with the mentality of today. It's not. You have to judge it in a context. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I can't see any other comments on the chat, no raising hand. So thank you very much, Marika, for this presentation once again. And I want to continue to our last speaker, last but not least, will be Mr. Gerard O'Sullivan. I'm very sorry, my Gaelic is still in the very beginning.
Absolutely perfect.
From the Technology Enhanced Learning Department of the Munster Technology University in Ireland. And actually it was his institution, Cork Institute of Technology, who technically developed the platform, which you use now for the literacy online course. And there is hardly anybody who could inform us better about the benefits of an easily accessible and extendable online learning platform. Gerald, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just pop up my slides, and people, perhaps you, Carol, can let me know if you can see the slides okay.
It's still working, thinking about it, but it's in a good way.
It's heading in a good direction.
Okay, it's here now.
Okay, so what a fascinating discussion, and really useful for me to hear about, because I must confess, I'm not an archivist. I don't work in one of these national archives, and getting involved in this project has been a very interesting introduction into this whole area. So let me tell you about what I actually do. I am the head of the Department of Technology Enhanced Learning in Ireland's newest university, which is the Munster Technological University. And traditionally, staff in my department would have been involved in developing e-learning solutions for corporate clients. So we developed a lot of e-learning solutions for very well-known, very high-profile clients in areas like finance and pharmachem and gas and oil and so forth. And then informing us in incorporating us, as it were, as an academic department, the idea was that we would offer those same services internally and bring that same skill set to bear on internal business to what is now the university. But we continue to work on exploratory projects, this Digital Treasures project being one of them, in fact. So there's always a new thing coming along in this whole space where learning meets technology. So we try to stay on top of it. And as you might be anticipating, the whole thing, when it works well, forms something of a virtuous circle. So the services we provide bring a certain realism to the exploratory research that we do. And the exploratory research that we do obviously informs and ensures the currency of our provision here. And I suppose the Digital Treasures project and this course I'm going to tell you about operates somewhere here, perhaps, I suppose, somewhere in the middle ground between the mainstream stuff we do and the exploratory research that we do. Mind you, I should say, as part of the Digital Treasures project, we are also doing a lot of innovative work in terms of developing game-based learning approaches. So video games that learners can play, and they inhabit these little micro worlds and have to think from the inside out, and in that way learn about some of the great things we were just discussing there. In the usual way of things in the mainstream context, what we tend to do is provide information about online courses and support the college in its use of technology for teaching. But of course, as you may have noticed, there's a pandemic going on. So absolutely everything is happening online at the moment. So we have been very busy changing around our website and providing a lot of training and guidelines about so-called remote teaching. A lot of what we do, though, commercially and on this project can be described as instructional design. So just as some of the partners have been giving me an introduction to the world of archives and archival literacy, let me give you a very brief one about the world of instructional design. So basically, instructional design is about designing learning experiences that make it easier to acquire learning, or that make the acquisition of learning more efficient, more effective, and more appealing in some sense, you know, so more satisfying, maybe even introduce a little bit of fun to the learning experience, as our Maltese colleague was just outlining for us there. Sometimes it's a world or a practice described as applied learning theory. So we often think about how people learn, and we draw and abstract different lessons and principles from, you know, cognitive psychology and different schools of thought like social constructivism and connectivism and so forth, about, well, how best to help people learn. There's lots of different models, as you can imagine, for how you go about developing these learning experiences. I won't spend too long on this, don't worry. But, you know, this is a very common one, the ADDIE model. You begin by analyzing things, you design things, you develop things, you implement things, and then you evaluate things. Sometimes people make a little bit of a circle out of this so that the evaluation feeds back into the analysis. And sometimes people draw loads and loads of circles. This is probably the most fashionable approach to instructional design at the moment, and involves a lot of feedback and a lot of feed-forward loops, and it's kind of roughly equivalent or similar to the whole area of human-centered design. We use a pretty basic approach, and this is the one that we've used, I suppose, for this project, where we work with subject matter experts, in this case, people from the National Archives, in developing content, you know, usually just in the form of Word documents. In this case, we use Google Docs, and there's a bit of a review and edit cycle there. When people are happy with that much, we move on to the actual design and development process. In the case of this project, we use something that I have misspelt here. It's called Articulate Rise. I'll tell you more about that software in a moment. Things again go through a review and edit cycle, and then eventually we release the course as we have done in the case of this course. Prior to the learning content piece, we often bring clients, in this case partners of the Digital Treasures project, through a process like this. This is a template we've come up with to get people to think about all of the different interrelated things you need to think about when you're developing e-learning, or indeed any kind of course, you know. So think about the audience, think about the value add, think about what curated resources exist, already curated in a different sense, I should add to that, used by you guys in the archive area. So yeah, here are some very basic responses to some of those that we gathered as we were going along through this initial design phase, you know. So the course we developed is for high school or secondary school teachers, but it's also for their pupils, so-called Generation Z. It's in the area of archival literacy, and in terms of value add, these are some of the things partners were saying. Well, they want to create something that will be scalable, that gives them good analytics, and that will be reusable. And you can judge for yourself, I suppose, if we've achieved those things or not. In terms of learning outcomes, we were asked to create a course. This changed slightly, but these are the original learning outcomes from this process, whereby, you know, the usual formulation at the end of the course, the learner would have an understanding of the archival process and procedures and underlying principles. They would be able to contextualize archives, you know, with respect to things like time and culture and the creator and publication history, and then finally would be able to create their own personal learning experience around, there's that word again, around a primary source. As part of this early kind of design process as well, we also did what we would call pre-visualization or just wireframing of things. So anyone who's seen the final course will realize that these are actually these drawings, these wireframe sketches have actually very good fidelity to what became the final solution that we came up with. So yeah, we went through these various different phases. Then once we had the design phase out of the way, subject matter experts among the participating countries started coming at us with lots of text and documents. We offered our comments, other partners offered comments, so there was a kind of peer review process. But I suppose our comments would have focused on things like how to chunk up the content, how to break it up into digestible pieces, how to sequence the content. You know, ideally you want things to move from the specific to the general, from the known to the unknown. You also want to have a good balance of passive presentation of content and more active sequences. So those are just examples of the kind of principles that we'd have in mind when we review documents like that. Eventually, once all of that was agreed, we started creating something a bit more media rich. So we chopped up the document and we put it up on this piece of software called Articulate Rise, which still allowed the partners to offer their comments and reviews. And, you know, sometimes it might have been things like, well, a video would be good here. Could we add some interaction here? Or it might have been us in some cases saying, I think there should be a knowledge test here, or there should be something a bit more interactive going on there. And so it wasn't until that was all finished that we finally put this media-rich content, this instructionally designed content, into a system called Moodle. So let me just say quickly what these different systems are. So Articulate Rise 360 is one of many different e-learning authoring tools that we use. It's not free, unfortunately. In fact, it's a little bit expensive, but it is a very good tool for creating media-rich interactive learning content, and also a very good tool in terms of managing versions and supporting that kind of review and editing process that I spoke about a moment ago. Moodle, many of you may know. If you don't, it's an example of a learning management system. So learning management system, also called a virtual learning environment, is basically a bit of server software that provides a number of different tools in different categories to support things like, obviously, the sharing of learning materials or content, but can also support different kinds of assessment, different kinds of online assessment, different kinds of, sorry, I'm just checking the time here, different kinds of communication and collaboration, and also, handily enough, provides different ways to register students and track students, and provides you with lots of analytics and data. And this is an open source one, meaning it's free. And not only that it's free, but that it's being continually reviewed and improved by the community. And so this is just a slightly different picture of what I was sharing earlier. We have the subject matter expert and ourselves, the TEL department, Technology Enhanced Learning Department, working together in Articulate Rise, and then things go up on the Moodle learning management system, and the learners get to have a look at it there. They get to register themselves on the course, as do teachers, who can take some of this content, by the way, of course, and reuse it and remix it into their own practice, into their own teaching practice for their own ends. So in all, we developed 3 different modules. These are just simple screenshots here, each introduced with a video to give it a kind of a human touch. And you can see them there. There's a kind of an introduction to archives. Just moving something out of my way there. There's stuff about the archive of anyone, an archive for anyone, where the learner learns about identifying key records about different periods and activities in their life, and learns to differentiate between legal and formal information, etc., etc. Look, I won't. You can read very well yourselves. I won't read it out. But just to give a sense of what it ended up looking like, then I suppose a lot of the time, what we've done is just created nice visually attractive graphic assets, you know, like this one, and obviously have styled up the text. Also, as part of that, we would use, and I suppose this is again kind of based on what we would know about how people learn and what we would know about user experience, we've included or incorporated a lot of visual cues throughout the thing. So these are kind of cognitive shortcuts, so that when learners see these different points, same as you would in a kind of a textbook or whatever, you know, you realize, this is what a definition looks like, or this is what a case study looks like, or this is what a knowledge check looks like. So, you know, these are all just kind of random screenshots, really. Sometimes we went a bit further and we were, you know, able to use some of this great content. I mean, what's great about this whole area really is just how visually impactful and visually attractive some of the content is. And we were able to take some of this content and make it interactive as well. So in this case, you click on the different images and you get more kind of information about them. There's another kind of example where we were, I guess, just trying to bring, you know, linear text to life a little bit. So given that Carol is facilitating this session, I said on the screenshot, I'd click on the Austrian State Archives, but you know, this is obviously a map you can click around on and get more information. And then, as I mentioned, there are these knowledge checks throughout, and they always look like this. And these are auto-corrected tests. So in a sense, you can do it in an automated way where there's no tutor figure or what have you in the loop. So I'm not sure if this is of interest to people, but you know, going back to July, we did our testing and feedback. Then we did our implementation, which I've also spelled correctly. We created an improved course based on the feedback we received, and made it available to the public. So it's been available since December, and a Spanish version has also been developed. And in the unlikely event that you're at this webinar and haven't yet seen the course or don't know how to register for it, all you do is go to this address, which I'm sharing on the screen and can drop into the chat in a second. And you can register yourself. You can either sign up for an account, or you can log in using your Google details if you have Google details. And hoping that people find it of use and of interest in their teaching practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerard. I think we got now a real good insight into the background of the making of the online literacy course. Are there some remarks, questions to this specific topic?
And I've just added the URL, just in case people hadn't seen it. That's the link in the chat for people to register themselves.
Yes. So please be free. If you're curious of something else, or also regarding the other speakers.
I think it's clear I've anticipated all of the questions that people might possibly have and dealt with them comprehensively.
Yes.
Carl.
Yes, perfect lectures. All questions are answered in advance.
You did tell people there's going to be a test afterwards, though, did you?
I won't do this. Yeah. Well, so if there is no other question, I want to thank you very much for your presence and participation. So I want to thank the speakers for the really comprehensive presentations, which can be regarded as a kind of, well, as a background for the using of this archival online literacy course. From my point of view, children, pupils have the right to get familiar with primary sources, with the fundaments of our heritage. So it should be obligatory to deal with them. They got a completely different relation to their own history. And this heritage is kept in archives. And this online literary course is a quite excellent prepared path and a chance to access the material which is normally not that easy to access. So it's really an offer for both, for teachers and for pupils, to enlarge the horizon of history teaching. So this is really one basic message we want to give to you. So thank you very, very much. I hope you saved the link of the online course. Try it, make an account, play with it, send us feedback. And we hope that we can give to the next generation a lot of more value than in the past. Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. So, Sahid.
Bye. Thank you all.